Hello and welcome back to the show. My name is Sam and this is The Lonely Chapter. On this show, I speak to interesting people, extracting their stories, the lessons they've learned along the way, and their knowledge in order for you to find value from it. So I realized that I've been doing this podcast now for over 6 months and that time has absolutely flown by. I've spoken to so many interesting people. It's opened up so many opportunities to speak to these people and learn from people who, some of who I've followed online for many years, and now I'm talking to them one on one. It's really, really phenomenal, and I've really, really enjoyed it. So, thank you if you've been a listener from the start. Thank you if this is the first time you've heard my voice. Hopefully, you're going to enjoy it. So. Today, we are going to reflect. So, I've looked back over the 6 months or over 6 months of doing this and have taken 6 lessons away from that. Now, obviously, I've done 31 episodes currently, and that's loads of people I've managed to speak to in such a short time and having these really interesting conversations. So, picking only 6 was difficult, but I hope you'll enjoy. Thank you for listening. This one was made for your enjoyment. So, lesson 1, straight into it, and we're looking back to episode 14 with Chloe Gibbons here. So, Chloe is a lawyer, a good friend of mine, and we spoke about loads of interesting things. But the thing I want to take away from this one, and the thing that sort of kept coming up throughout the episode, was the sort of fear of failure that we have as humans. So, Chloe talked a lot about her failures and how she's learned from them now, but we reflected on how people can fear failures. So, on reflection, I don't think failure is something that we should be fearing. I think it is an opportunity to learn. And Chloe spoke about some of her experiences, as I said, and some of those were it ranged from sort of asking a silly question at university in a lecture. There are no silly questions. And I know that's a cliche thing to say. Everyone always says it, but it's true. She was in a room of people and she didn't understand what was being said by the lecturer. And she was brave enough to put her hand up and just say, sorry, I don't quite understand what you're saying. And loads of people came up to her after and said, I'm so glad you asked that because I didn't either. But in that moment, she stepped up, asked the question, and all these people learned from it. So it's fantastic. And then going forward in life, she didn't get a job that she was after, and she spent months in the process going for this job. She told other people about it. Everyone sort of knew she was going for it. They knew she was doing well in the process, and then she didn't get it. And that's a really hard thing for people to go through. Again, we'll touch on something later with a different lesson, but it's a difficult thing. And it'd be easy for her in that scenario to just drop her head and say, oh, maybe this isn't for me, and get quite down about it. But she went on and she got her dream job with a different company in a few months later. So it's that learning from it, learning from where she went wrong in that first one, maybe, and how she took that forward going forward. When it comes to failure, I think we fear it because of what we think other people will say. We always think the worst of things and we think people are going to react negatively or laugh at us or whatever it is. But realistically, people aren't going to do that. And if they are doing that, get those people out of your life because they're not doing you any favors. But what you'll find is when you fail, people will come up to you and say maybe cliche things, but it's all with good intention. And it will be about, don't worry too much about that one, mate. Just carry on and it will go better next time. And those are the sort of people you want around. It's just people who are going to be real with you. And no one should be putting anyone down for failing. Like, that is the lowest point of anything. And I think, yeah, if you've got people in your life that are doing that, then get them out of your life. But if it is just in your mind, as I think a lot of the time it is, I think sometimes, well, I think most of the time, it's something that we are perceiving the worst of, and yeah, overcome that. This is something as well that I've not only spoken to Chloe about. I've spoken to many people about it across all of my episodes, and it's sort of crops up here and there. And I think that just shows me that it's something that most people like have an issue with, and most people feel. Some people overcome it, some people are still living in it. And I think just going forward, like if it is something that you resonate with and you feel often, then next time you have a situation where you have a chance to fail, just take 5 minutes, write down the worst case scenario. What can happen? Okay, I'm going for this job. What's the worst case? Oh, well, I don't get the job, and in however long I can go again. That's pretty much it. Like there's not much more to it. So I think by writing it down and sort of being real with it, you can work out that the worst case scenario isn't as bad as you think. And hopefully that can help you just relax a bit, and look at it as an opportunity to learn. So there is no failure. You've basically got the option of success, or you've got the option to learn. So that's lesson 1. On to lesson 2. So lesson 2 comes from a more recent episode, and that's episode 28 with Craig Sadler. So Craig rode the Atlantic in 2022, and he spoke in that episode about the differences in mindset between himself and his rowing partner, Stu. So the row is 3,000 miles, which is just, you can't even think about rowing for that long. It's phenomenal. 64 days in a boat. Really, really good effort by the guys. But in terms of the mindset that they had, they were polar opposites, you could say. So when they got to the halfway point, 1,500 miles, Stu's goal was the end. So he was thinking, I have 1,500 miles left to go. We're halfway there. Craig's position was very different. He was thinking, we've done 1,500 miles. Like, that's all behind me. I've rowed for that long. That's phenomenal. Like, and in Craig's mind, every 2-hour stint rowing was a little win. So he's sort of taken the bigger goal and just broken it down into bite-sized chunks. And I think that's really nice. And I think by doing that, you can find little moments of success. But in his case, every 2 hours. We spoke in the episode about potential downsides of just having the end goal as your main goal. And I reflected back on one of my favorite books, which is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. In that book, Viktor Frankl discusses the impact of hope on the prisoners in concentration camps during World War II, particularly around Christmas 1944. Obviously, the war ends next year, so the Allies are moving in, but they don't know when they're going to get there. So Frankl observed that the death rate among prisoners spiked significantly between Christmas 1944 and New Year's 1945. This increase was not due to harsher conditions or lack of food, but rather the psychological impact of unmet expectations. Many prisoners had held on to the hope that they would be liberated by Christmas. When this hope was not fulfilled, they lost courage and succumbed to despair, which severely affected their physical and mental resilience, leading to a higher mortality rate. So that sort of points out that if you have that goal in mind and something changes, that can really damage you. So in their rowing scenario, they were delayed by at least 10 days, and they'd run out of food, and because of storms and stuff, they had to just sit and wait to row. So it went longer than they thought. So that points out the idea that if you've just got a goal at the end, if that goal changes or the time scale changes that you're working towards, that can really throw you because you've got nothing else to think about. On the flip side, goals are important. It's important to have an end goal. And again, in Viktor Frankl's book, he references Nietzsche's words, which are, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And that highlights the importance of having a goal at the end. But I think they work well together, and I think the importance of having little wins scattered throughout that goal, that journey towards the goal, sorry, is really important. And I think that by doing that, you give yourself those little wins. And if that goal or the timescale towards that goal changes, you have a backup plan. You have still those little wins. You're not going to completely go off the edge. You're not going to drop your head too far. Yeah, it'll be a bit of kick in the teeth, but you'll get over it and you'll keep just working towards those little goals. And then eventually you get to your bigger goal. So that is lesson 2. Lesson 3, also from quite a recent one. So this was with Georgie Barbar in episode 27. Georgie and I discussed the potential increase in division that's coming from the sort of relabeling of ourselves that seems to be quite prevalent at the moment and in the recent years. I think in decades gone by, like society worked very hard to get away from division. Obviously, we know like what happened in the past was awful. And we sort of work towards this idea of a society where everyone can be who they want to be. They are who they are. No one chooses to come from any sort of background. But we want to look at people on the basis of their character. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter what skin color they are or what sexuality they are. In Martin Luther King's speech, he says, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And I know there's a lot of debate around that and how he sort of meant it, but taking it outside of race and into anything, it would be silly to say that people of different backgrounds all have the same experiences and opportunities. We know that's not true. But it shouldn't be the first thing that we look at when considering how we perceive a person. It seems now that in society, we lead with our labels for whatever reason, and we justify our opinions on these labels. Because I'm this is my thoughts, and because you're that, you can't say that thing about this group because you're not in that group. You don't understand it. It just seems to me that we're causing more and more division amongst ourselves by doing that. And I don't see it going well. I can't understand why we're doing it. Well, I can, but I don't see it ending well. I think we need to get back to a place where we can just have conversations about difficult situations, difficult topics, without getting emotionally invested in it. It can be very difficult for people to do that, and I understand that, but it's so important that when we speak to people, the first thing we see isn't the color of their skin or their gender or whatever it is. We listen to the words coming out of their mouth. Surely that's the most important thing. And if they're saying something that we don't agree with, well, let's put our perspective across. Maybe we'll change their mind. Maybe by having a civil conversation, that's the way that we start changing people's minds or changing our own minds, because we're not always right, and we have to admit that. And yeah, it was a really interesting thing that Georgie and I spoke about and reflected on. And yeah, hopefully we can turn it round and just get back to a place where we're all together as one, and we're not just separating ourselves again into these little groups of certain labels. So that is lesson 3. Lesson 4 takes us back to episode 15 with Terry Tucker. So Terry was a SWAT hostage negotiator, and he had some really, really cool insights and really cool stories from that time as well, amongst other things. Like his whole journey through life was very interesting to hear. What he taught us was the 738-55 rule. So in communication, how something is perceived by someone else is 7% the words that we say, 38% the tone of your voice, and 55% body language. I think we often worry too much about the words we say or what we're not saying. So we might say a word wrong, or we might use the wrong word here or there, but we don't necessarily think about how we're saying the word. We could say the best words in the world, but if you say it in a monotone voice or being very stationary, it's not going to come across well, regardless. Think of a time when you've seen someone go up in front of a group of people to talk, and as they're standing there, they might be rubbing their arm, rubbing their hands together, rubbing their neck, their throat. These are all signs of sort of nervousness, and anyone in the room in that moment can see that and feel that. So that just shows how big body body language is. I've been thinking about it myself, and have I done this before? Absolutely. Do I still do it? Probably. Have I improved, and am I still improving? Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think I'm aware of it, and I'm aware that the body language we use is the biggest proportion of how we communicate and how things are perceived. So things you could start working on, things that I've tried to work on, is things like eye contact, hand gestures, looking around the room, looking at everyone, not just looking at one person, not looking at the floor, not looking at the light at the back of the room. Chin up. Just stand there with a bit of confidence. Inside, you might be shaking, you might be feeling really nervous, but how you actually present yourself outwardly can trick people. So it's so important. And the tone as well. Again, this is something that I'm working on. Where you put the emphasis on certain words is really important. And by doing that, you can make a big impact in how your message comes across. So think about some of those things in your own life. If you realize now that those are things you do, body language, tone of voice, just start thinking about them a bit more. Think about a good speaker that you maybe look at and think they know what they're saying. Have a deeper look. Look at what they're doing with their body, not just their words. Because if you took those same words and put them on stage in a body that was sort of rubbing their neck and covering their face as they talk, I'm sure you wouldn't be as touched by those words. So have a look at it. Tell me what you think. And that is number 4. 2 more to go. So this is lesson 5. Lesson 5 comes from episode 17 with Suzanne Jabbour. And Suzanne spoke to us about grief. So she's a grief educator. And the thing that sort of stood out to me was the idea of expanding how we look at what grief is. So we often think grief and we think instantly to the worst case scenario, which is a close relative dying, or a close friend, or someone in our life passing away. That is grief for most people. And it is grief, absolutely. But we don't think about the minor griefs in our life. So one of the things that she mentioned would be not getting the job you wanted. And I said about from Chloe's earlier that we touch on it again. So not getting the job you want can be really tough for people, because people can start to think ahead. And if they're in a process and they're getting close to the end, they might start picturing their lives with that job. They might start thinking, okay, if I get that job, this will happen, and that will happen, and then I know this person and whatever. They start to sort of get a little plan together. If that gets taken away from them in an instant with that email that comes through saying, sorry, you didn't get the job this time, that can really knock people, and understandably so. So I think by thinking of that as a grief, and rather than just if it's someone you know going through that, rather than just going up to them and saying something like, oh, they don't know what they're missing, or, oh, it's fine, you'll get an even better job next time. These are just sort of cliche things we say to try and make the person feel better. But maybe they just need to speak about it a bit. So Suzanne spoke about just going up to them and saying, look, I know you really wanted that job. If you're anything like me, I know that must be really tough for you. So do you want to talk about it? And just opening up that space for someone to just say, yeah, do you know what? I'm gutted. I wanted that job and blah, 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 blah. By doing that, you start to create that comfortable feeling of being able to talk about those feelings. And whilst that is nothing in comparison to losing a loved one, say, it still gets you semi-prepared for having those conversations around those same things. So just expanding our definition to include those minor griefs in our life rather than just the major griefs is something that I think I will be doing, and hopefully you guys as well will agree, and you can start to look at in a different way. So that is lesson number 5. So on to the last lesson. So lesson number 6 it came from episode 26, which was Rob Reed. But the lesson, I suppose, also comes from Stephen Bartlett. So during the episode, I was reflecting on Rob's book, which is called Pippin's Rich Life. And I asked Rob about the reframing of imposter syndrome. So he spoke about it in the book. There's a really nice quote where the main character, Liam, says, "I'm not comfortable." And his mentor turns around and says the following: "All progress takes place outside the comfort zone, Liam. If you're uncomfortable, that means you have the opportunity to grow. So don't call it imposter syndrome, call it a growth opportunity, because that's exactly what it is." Now, straight away, Rob admitted that he'd used the phrases from other places, but that's where I saw them. So it's absolutely, he's getting the credit for it in my eyes for opening it to me. Now, straight away, Rob explained that he didn't get those off the top of his head, and the well-known phrase is progress takes place outside of the comfort zone. And then the last bit, which is the growth opportunity part, comes from Stephen Bartlett. So the idea of taking imposter syndrome and changing, reframing how we look at it. So again, reframing is something that I've spoken about with quite a lot of people, a lot of my episodes, and it's something that's quite, it's very interesting to me because it can completely change how you look at something just by changing the words you use around it. So imposter syndrome, the word, when you say that, it instantly gives it a negative feel. If you change that and say, oh, this is a growth opportunity, well, it's a positive. It's a positive instantly. So just by doing that is really interesting to me. And so imposter syndrome, for anyone who doesn't know what it is that feeling when you get into a position where you're slightly uncomfortable. Maybe you start to doubt yourself. You start to think, who am I to be here in this role, telling these people what to do or advising these people or whatever it is? You start to sort of double guess and sort of think, who am I to do this? But that happens every single time you push yourself. Anyone who's ever tried to challenge themselves in life, push them outside of their comfort zone, will have felt that feeling or very similar. So getting that reframe into that positive, this is a growth opportunity, doesn't mean you have to feel comfortable with it. In fact, if you feel comfortable, then you're not outside your comfort zone by nature. But if you get to a point where you can say, okay, I'm pretty uncomfortable here, I'm not 100% sure, but it's a chance to grow, that is completely changes how you look at it. So I saw this video recently where this guy was just on a beach, and I'm sure there's loads of videos like it. He was just on a sandy beach and he had a stick in his hand and he'd drawn a circle just around himself. And then he stepped outside of the circle and he said, "The circle is my comfort zone. I'm now outside of my comfort zone. As I learn and I grow, my comfort zone expands." So he draws a little semicircle around himself back to the circle. As he steps out of that, he's into another bit outside of his comfort zone. But again, as he draws another circle, his comfort zone expands. He keeps doing this a few times, and it's just a visual representation of what we're talking about. So by stepping out of your comfort zone, yeah, you're in an uncomfortable position. That is the nature of it. And you won't progress in life if you don't do that. You have to push yourself to get to the next stage. And some people do that, some people don't. But if you do, expect to be uncomfortable. And then with time, it becomes your comfort zone. And then your comfort zones expand. And then over time, obviously, the bigger your comfort zone gets, the better you are at dealing with those uncomfortable positions. And even further, you have to push yourself to be in that uncomfortable position. In my scenario, looking at this podcast, if I looked 5 years ago at myself, I was a very, very different person. There's no way that I couldn't really speak to people in general life easily, like strangers. I'd find it very difficult and awkward. I'd sort of not really enjoy it. And then after a social meeting, sort of be like, oh, like, why didn't you say anything? Like, they're going to think you're weird or whatever. Like, all these things. And they probably did, whatever. But I changed that. And now when I go out, I don't have to drink to be social. I can go out sober and just talk to people. And that was something I really struggled with for a while, was not that I ever had a problem with drink, but I felt that I had to sort of have one or two drinks just to be able to speak to people. So learning that myself was phenomenal, and just stepping outside my comfort zone. Yeah, the first few times I spoke to people sober, it was horrible. But now I feel so comfortable with it. I can go up to people and talk, and I do this podcast. I speak to new people who I've never met before every week. And it's phenomenal. Yeah, looking back 5 years ago, this wouldn't be happening. So maybe that will inspire you to just put yourself outside your comfort zone if you're listening, because it's been one of the most exciting things that I've ever done. And I'm excited to keep doing it and see where it takes me. So that is number 6. And that brings us in for our 6 lessons over the last 6 months. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all again for everyone who's been supporting me, both from the start and if you've listened here. I can't wait to keep pushing on and see what happens. And I'm really enjoying doing the podcast. Any feedback you've got, obviously send me messages. You can comment on shows. Wherever you're listening, if you can rate the show, that really helps as well. But all I'd ask is that if you enjoyed this episode, or if you've enjoyed another episode, people always tell me, oh, this episode was really good. If you really enjoy an episode, all I ask is that you just share it with one other person. Send it to one person in your life who you think might enjoy it or find value from it or needs to hear it at that time in their life. Because that's how we reach new people. And that is the aim. It's just to get as many people involved, hearing, learning, and hopefully growing themselves. And one last thing for you to do as well is, if you haven't already, please follow the show where you're listening. So over 50% of people who are listening aren't actually following the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So if that's you, please just hit the button. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and I would really, really appreciate it. You can also follow us on Instagram at Lonely Chapter Podcast, where you can see all the clips from the episodes, little highlights, video clips as well. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for listening.